So we're talking about the fiscal year 2018, which begins on July 1st, 2017 and runs through June 30th, 2018. And in the way of goals and challenges for the budget, one of the things the city is really proud of, in my estimation, is that for 8 consecutive budget proposals now, we've had the same property tax rate. And so 13.5277 per thousand of taxable value is what this the property tax rate that this budget proposal involves. There's also a sewer or wastewater increase to the user rates to fund future citizen needs. So as usual at this time of year, I run through sort of the high-level goals of the budget: to pass a balanced budget where expenditures don't exceed revenues and resources, to maintain the property tax rate, to maintain sufficient fund balances and provide high-quality public services through all the department heads. And then the challenges are generally rising costs. Costs tend to rise. Provision of services at economical rates, and then planning for future needs. So a very quick overview of property taxation in Iowa. Property is divided into various categories or classes under the Iowa Code, and there are growth limitations in those values, and that is accomplished through a percentage reduction called a rollback. That rollback for each class of property is indicated on this slide, and it's compared between the new FY18 rollback and the prior year, the year we're currently in, FY17. So you'll see that in the residential class, there was a small uptick in the rollback, meaning property taxable values are higher this coming year. And in the multi-residential, the new class of apartment properties, essentially, it's going down. Commercial and industrial stayed the same, and ag went up a little bit. So a residential property assessed at $100,000, or if it's a $400,000 or a $200,000 property, this can be applied in a multiplication sort of fashion, in a linear fashion. If the taxable value was $55,626 last year, it would be $56,939 this year, and it would have risen $1,313. So at a constant tax rate of 13.5277, the property tax to be paid to the city increases for that resident at a rate of $17.76 per 100,000. For commercial property assessed at $500,000, the rollback is 90%. So $450,000 would be the taxable value, the same as the current fiscal year. And so the taxable value is the same, the tax rate's the same, the property tax would be the same for the portion payable to the city. So then I won't go through this slide in great detail, but essentially, I always feel it's important to point out that the commercial property tax reform legislation of 2013, what it did, it rolled back commercial values, taxable values, therefore reducing tax revenue, and there are state replacement payments, sometimes called the backfill, to local governments, not just cities, but schools and counties and others as well. So there's a standing appropriation. Those payments are important to cities and, other local governments as well, because they replace property taxes that would have been received. And they fund the kinds of things listed near the bottom of this slide: police, fire, parks, recreation, debt payments, economic development projects, and employee benefits. So the city's property tax levy can be divided into various components or levies, all authorized under the Iowa Code. And I have a definition page, which I won't run through in detail, but it's there if people want to refer to it. The essence of it is that some levies are limited as to rate, others are limited as to what purpose the funds can be used for, and others are limited in both manners. So here's a summary of the proposed FY18 property tax rates compared to the current year property tax actual rates for the city. You'll notice the total at the bottom is the same. The debt service levy is the same. Next up from the bottom, the general fund levy is the same at the top. In between, a couple go up, a couple go down, but that just has to do with the different purposes for which those funds can be utilized. So essentially, we have the same property tax rate. This next slide shows the dollars generated by that property tax rate divided into each levy and shows the total amount. So because taxable values are higher, the revenue generated is higher for the coming budget year. So the city's property tax levy is not the only one on people's tax bills. So this shows for an Iowa City School District area resident within Coralville what their total tax rate will be for FY18 using the information we have right now, which is the proposed City of Coralville tax rate for FY18. And since other entities have not set their tax rates yet, I'm just putting on here the FY17 tax rates and showing sort of a comparison of where the tax dollar goes for the typical resident of Coralville. So this is that same information in the form of a pie chart with percentages. So you'll see that the schools are about 39% of a tax bill for that resident. The city is about 38%, the county is about 19%, and then you have Kirkwood Community College and some other levies mixed in there for smaller amounts. So the general fund is the chief operating fund for the city, and general fund revenue sources include taxes, licenses and permits, use of money and property, which is a fancy way of talking about rent or interest, or a legal way of talking about that. Intergovernmental payments like grants or contracts between the city and other governmental entities. Charges for services like rec program fees, T-ball sign-up, things like that. And then other financing sources, borrowings, transfers between funds, things like that. And for FY18, the estimated general fund revenues are $22.9 million. That's a 15.5% increase from FY17's general fund level. And you just heard the auditor talking about Brown Deer Golf Club being moved from an enterprise fund into the general fund. That is 11.7% of that 15.5% increase. It's not that the whole fund, all those costs went up. It's that we, in addition to some increases in costs or revenues, we put Brown Deer into that fund. And that fund supports all general fund functions like public safety, health, social services, culture, recreation, economic development, general government, things like that. So those revenue sources that add up to that $22.9 million are listed here, roughly in order of greatest to smallest. So you'll see property and excise taxes, charges for services, hotel motel tax, and then a listing from there of some of the smaller items. General fund expenditures, are depicted on this slide, and so you have sort of a donut graphical representation and then listing from larger to smallest by category with the percentages as well. So park and rec, police, fire, animal control, library, and on down the list. And here's that same information in dollar amount form and comparing FY18's proposal and FY17's actual budget and increases or decreases. Again, with the top line, Park and Rec, you see an increase of $1,685,000, and that again is because of the inclusion of Brown Deer Golf Club as well. That's a large part of that. We also have special revenue funds like the road use tax fund. And so those distributions are sent from the state based on the last official census, which for the city of Coralville is 18,907 persons. For the coming budget year, they're estimated at $119.50 per capita. So we expect $2.26 million. Those estimates are usually somewhat conservative that the DOT puts out. And then here's a division within the road use tax fund of what those funds get spent on. So roadway maintenance, street lighting, traffic safety, snow removal, and down that list. At the bottom you'll see, well, you'll note that the $2.815 million total is greater than the next line, which is road use tax funding of $2.261. So we added that bottom part to show that we're not just running a deficit in that fund. Our proposal for that fund's budget uses some project reserves and some equipment reserves to complete projects and replace equipment, which is their intended purpose. So there's cash on hand for that difference between what will come in state road use taxes and the expenditures that are somewhat higher. So the enterprise funds are funded in most cases primarily through user rates. We are proposing no change in the user rates for public transit, water, stormwater, solid waste, or parking. We do have a proposed rate increase for the sewer enterprise fund because we have an improvement project, a rather large one, coming online in FY20, so a couple more years. This is the next to last anticipated rate increase for sewer as we've been sort of stair-stepping the rates to get to where the city needs to be to have the resources to finance that expansion to that plant. So the sewer rate change, at the top it lists the first 200 cubic feet amount and then the additional 100 cubic feet of metered water usage and shows the current and the proposed monthly rate. And then it takes what is a fairly typical household with 400 cubic feet of use and shows the monthly sewer amount that would be paid under the current rates and the proposed rates. And then in the way of an sort of high-level overview of the enterprise funds in general, we have a revenue and then an expenditure and transfer out column. So you'll note that expenditures and transfers out are in general roughly equivalent to revenues or lower. You'll see in wastewater that the expenditures, are relatively quite a bit lower than the revenues. And that's because we are accumulating resources to affect that plant improvement financing. Where you see expenditures a little higher than revenues, like solid waste, and especially in transit, there are expenditures for the replacement of equipment that are being funded from reserves. So those resources are in hand. It's not an unbalanced budget. And then I outlined four notable capital projects that are anticipated to be funded in FY18, and that's the South Flood Wall, Phase 2, along Clear Creek, the Stormwater Pump Station 7 and 8, also on either side of Clear Creek, Those two together represent really the final phase of the city's flood mitigation funding program. The First Avenue improvements to widen that roadway from 6th Street to 9th Street, and then the water plant expansion. So some information on timing and receiving additional information. On February 3rd, the Connection magazine is expected to appear on the city's website and in mailboxes. Excuse me. That will have a budget article that will have a lot of this information. And February 14th, we expect to have a public hearing at City Hall. That's about the next step on the agenda, is to set that hearing if the council and mayor are comfortable with the budget proposal. And then February 28th, we would anticipate city council adoption, and that would allow filing with the auditor prior to March 15th. And an overview of this will be posted after this evening on the website, at City Hall in printed form, at the library, and then, as I said before, we'll see it, residents will see it on February 3rd in the Connection magazine, and there will be a Coral Vision budget show again this year. So at this point, I'd like to say, even before questions, if there are any, a thank you to citizens, city staff and employees, department heads, city senior administration, and the mayor and city council, last but not least, for your support and focus on the budget process.